Good morning, everybody. This is Jake. I will be moderating this webinar. We have a full house today. This is awesome. Coming back from a trade show, a little bit of a webinar moment of lack of webinars, getting back into it here. So just before we get started, want to take care of a few house cleaning items. First and foremost, this is going to be recorded. So anybody who is hoping to watch this again, you are in luck. We will be posting this later on today on our website. We do encourage questions through this. And if you would open up that Q&A box down in that little toolbar that you got going on, expand that guy, get ready to type in your questions. That's where we want all those coming from. There is a chat window. Feel free to chat back and forth, make comments however you would like, but please put those questions in the Q&A so that we can get those answered. We do have a special treat for you guys joining us today, and for those obviously watching in the future. We have with us Billy Goodnick. He's a Santa Barbara landscape architect and garden designer. He does have quite the experience. I'm not going to get into everything here, but a few things that he's got under his belt. He teaches or has taught at a local community college. He's co-created and hosted a TV show, Garden Wise, and even authored a book on residential landscape design called Yards: Turn Any Outdoor Space into the Garden of Your Dreams. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand this right over to Billy. And we will just make sure you're unmuted.
Mute. Am I here?
You got it.
Okay, but I don't see my screen. Okay, we're off to a flying start here, folks. I'm trying to find my, there, you see me?
You are back up and running, my man.
This is great. As soon as I get the cassette player in my car fixed, I'll be completely up to date technologically. Welcome aboard, everybody. Jake, thanks for having me here. And I think we've beat all the Y2K technical problems that might arise. I'm going to just launch in here. So I learned a long time ago, when you're a speaker doing any sort of presentation, the rule is tell them what you're going to tell them, then tell them, and then tell them what you told him. So at least I'm going to give you a tell them what I'm going to tell you. This is just a general overview, not a lot of deep detail. This is based on classes I've taught through adult education to, everyday homeowners, to beginning college students, adult ed sort of things. So we're not going real deep on anything. It's more just kind of to demystify landscape design process for anybody who's not in the profession. And for those of you who have done this, I've often heard that it's just a good reinforcement and an insight into how other people think about design projects. So I'm focusing strictly on residential design. Just a little PS there. My 30 plus years of teaching have made me a better landscape designer, because once you find out how to understand what it is that you do and pass it on to other people, you get better at what you do. So just a little nudge there. If you have an opportunity to teach, by all means jump on it. The pay isn't much, but you'll learn a lot from doing it. So moving on, quick bio. I thought I'd give you some background. Born in Brooklyn, New York, and we were living in a brownstone, so there wasn't a whole bunch of gardening stuff. Early in my life, I got hooked on drumming, playing bongo drums, and eventually when we moved to LA, I got drumsticks and drum lessons, and music was kind of my whole life, and gardening was just chores. Folks would send us out to rake leaves, mow lawn, etc. Somehow, and it's a really long story, I fell in love with bonsai, the little Japanese trained trees, and house plants, and was starting to have my premature midlife crisis in the music world. I was a studio musician. I was out on the road for a year, doing it kind of nicely. And for some reason in my 20s thought, what am I going to be doing in 5 years, 10 years? and thought, well, I like plants. So I went back to school, got a hort degree, associate of arts, just enough to be dangerous, and got out and started working my way up the food chain. I got jobs at nurseries, worked for landscape contractors doing installation, mowing lawns, doing everything, and realized what I really wanted to do was design. So after a few years of that, moved up to San Luis Obispo in the Central Coast of California, which is where I got a job for one of the Land FX partners, for Jeremiah's dad. Had an office job, which is great. Moved to the Bay Area, was doing private practice. I even had an interminable 6-month stint as a landscape architect for the Navy. Buy me a beer and I'll tell you the rest of that story, but it was not where I wanted to be. Got out of there, moved back to Santa Barbara, my hometown, for a long time, and got hired as city landscape architect in the Parks and Recreation Department, and did that for a couple of decades. And the caveat there is that I was more a project manager than a hands-on designer. So a lot of the day-to-day stuff, technical stuff, kind of left me. 2009, got dumped in the recession, and just went into private practice, doing a lot more teaching. Found out that I had a knack for writing, started as blogging, got picked up by some local and then national websites doing blogging for folks like Fine Gardening and Sunset, and eventually branched out and wrote a book. There's a little cover shot there, and I can talk more about it later. This presentation is basically the summation of the book, hitting on some of the high points of it. So what we'll cover today, there's a logical design process that goes a little beyond ooh shiny when you see something you like at a nursery, taking it home and saying, oh, there's a space, I'll put it in there. It's like any other design and problem solving. The keystone for me, or the cornerstone for me, is we're trying to create gardens that are beautiful, functional, and I have beauty, function, beauty. The last beauty should say sustainable. How do I overlook that? Spell check. And a real focus on plant palette development, because I've come up with a system that I think works for a lot of people. So fasten your seatbelts. Let's get going and dive into the stuff. So as I said, we're trying to create gardens that are beautiful, that are useful, and that are also sustainable. There, I got it right on that one. That's the big idea. So when I talk about beauty, we're talking about aesthetics and hitting all the senses that we can. It deals with some of the basic visual design principles like harmony and contrast, balance and scale. Most people enjoy a garden that has some sense of style, usually related to the setting, the architectural style of the house. We're creating beauty by choosing the materials and the plants and things that lend itself to my client's taste, as well as the site and what we have to work with and budget and all that sort of thing. But basically, we're trying to create some beauty. So, flower color, interesting foliage, the sound of water, the tactile sensation of touching bark and other materials. Those are all things that we can hit on, fragrance, etc. Try to expand the design so it reaches as much as we can. We also want it to be usable, functional. It's not just about decorating and making it pretty. Most of us want to be able to go out into the garden and do things. My first question of any client after we say hello and I get to scratch their doggy behind the ears is, what do you want to be able to do when you go outside? People jump to, oh, I like this plant, or can we use brick or whatever? That all comes later. Form follows function, as most of us know. So we want it to be functional first. It also needs to be comfortable. The weather changes. People have different preferences in terms of wanting to be warmer or colder. I usually ask, are you a slug or a lizard? And I get a strange look, and then I go into it. We also want to make it convenient. If you're going to try to work on your vegetable garden, but you got to back the car out of the garage in order to get to your tools, that's not going to work for too long. So it's places to grow food. It's places to hang out with the family, invite friends over, live outdoors, look at the night sky. All of that is exploiting the outdoor spaces to expand our homes, to be able to live outside. And then we get into sustainability, and that's a tricky term. It means so many things to so many people, but I draw your attention to the sites rating system. If you're familiar in architecture with LEED buildings, we've got platinum and gold and silver LEED. It all has to do with energy efficiency, environmental impact, that sort of thing. Well, it crosses over, of course, into landscape design as well. First thing and foremost is looking at soil as a living thing. It's an ecosystem. It's how we manage our stormwater so we're not carrying pollutants off site and we're capturing as much water as we can on the site. I'm on the West Coast. We deal with drought. Anything we can do to recharge groundwater is great. So all of these other points here, energy consumption, trying to benefit human wellness, etc., is all part of making a garden sustainable. So it's a matter of using locally appropriate plants. I'm not completely stuck with having to use natives from the Santa Barbara area, as long as the plant is adapted to our climate. And that includes a lot of the Mediterranean climates. Sometimes those are the better choice. It's recycling materials, that simple, beautiful, broken concrete stacked wall, or not putting a lawn in a stupid place like a south-facing 45-degree slope. The only way you can water that is to add cornstarch, I guess. On the lower right, you're looking at our Whole Foods parking lot, which all drains to a bioswale. So the water is cleaned up a little bit before it hits the local creeks. So all of that is part of being earth friendly and being sustainable. So the three big points: beautiful, useful, sustainable. It spells BUS if you need an acronym. So the design process. Design is problem solving. You've got something you want, you've got existing conditions to work with. So like any problem, it starts with analysis. What is it you want? What are the desires, whether it's aesthetic or outdoor living? And what are the conditions you have to work with? You've got opportunities, you've got constraints. We need to understand those to put together an intelligent, useful design. Once we have all of that, that's really just a bunch of data. So we need to define it. What does it all mean? What does it mean that you've got a south-facing living room, or a view of something you don't like, or lousy soil, etc.? How are we going to act on that? And that gets us to the synthesis, putting it together, refining it into a design, and working our way through the design process. So 3 big steps. So when we say analysis, there's a couple things. There's the needs. What are the desires? For a residential landscape design, we're dealing with outdoor cooking and eating, a place to just meditate, reading, entertain. I call that the chillaxatorium. From the ancient Roman word, I guess. Growing food, hobbies, all of this sort of stuff comes in, and this is the needs assessment that starts putting the program together on what you're trying to accomplish. In addition to that, we've got the site analysis, and here is a very simple drawing. I apologize. We're looking straight down. I hope you can see my pointer here. Here's the house, living room, kitchen, master bedroom. And we just walk through and just do kind of a zone of what we're observing, what we might want to change. So you might mark up that there's a slope over here that erodes, but I've got good soil at the bottom. I've got a, pardon my adult language, but ugly chain link fence. This is a new thing I'm working on. I'm calling them emojis or emoticons. You'll probably see them soon. The lawn's too big. I got a 2-story neighbor, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know why I put a storage unit outside my master bedroom. And this room gets really hot as blazes. So this is just information. I take my desires, my program, and I take what the site has to offer. And that leads me to what I call the now what or so what drawing. And at this point, I think it's really important to stay general. On the site analysis I showed, it just said the dining area is too small. Right now, all I'm going to say is enlarge the patio. I'm not going to say herringbone brick on a 2-inch layer of compacted sand. That's a detail we get to later. I don't know if I'm going to reduce the lawn or eliminate the lawn. I'm going to move the storage area, etc. So this is like your vaguest not Las Vegas, your most vague action plan, and it just sort of sets the course for what it is you're trying to accomplish and how you're going to work with those site conditions, work with that program, and move forward into the design. I think this is a critical step, especially for DIYers, folks who are going to do their own design. Often they jump in with too much detail too soon. This doesn't apply to everything, but it's a big point that I make in my book, and it's developing a concept statement. And if you're already a designer, you're probably doing this in your head, but I find it's also valuable to engage my client in it or have them do it on their own. And basically, it's one nice tight sentence. My book editor and magazine editors drove this home for me. That explains the activity that I'm going to take a step back here. A concept statement applies to a usable space. So it's sort of getting your idea of where you want to go in terms of creating outdoor uses. So it's what's the activity that's going to happen in this outdoor room? What does it feel like? What's the sensation? And I mean viscerally, if I'm sitting here, what does it feel like? And then something about its appearance stylistically. And I'll explain this a little bit further, but this is my North Star in terms of staying on course and really defining what it is I'm trying to accomplish. So this is a screenshot from the book and goes into a lot of detail here. But basically, I come up with a statement that describes where I'm going. In this case, I want to create a cool, secluded, forested clearing where I can close my eyes and listen to birds. I think that's pretty specific, but it doesn't give me any design details, but it's where I'm heading. And I think a lot of us would like a little refuge in our yard. However, so what's it used for? We're using this to relax, commune with nature. What's the feeling? I want it cool and secluded. What does it look like when I'm in there? It looks like a forest clearing. Okay, so far so good, but I'm in the middle of suburbia. So reality check. I'm in suburbia. I'm not in the Sierras. There are no forests around my quarter-acre suburban subdivision. The area is totally exposed. There's no, it's just full sun. So there goes my cool and secluded. And it feels like Death Valley when I'm in there. So I set some objectives. I'm going to screen and shade, so I have seclusion. I'm going to size the space for a restful area. That's going to be just enough room for a table and chairs. And I'm going to add a few amenities that get me to my goal. So I'm not going to belabor this, but I think it's a really important stopping point along the way before you dive into the design. It is your North Star. So for example, you can reverse engineer it. You can look at a space or have a client tell you, I really like the look of this. Well, what are they really liking? It's a sunny, cozy social space. That's a very tight concept statement. It's an open, airy room for conversation. It's what we're going to do. It's what it looks like. It's what it's going to feel like. I think it's a really important place to stop in the design along the way. So moving on, in some cases, if you're working with a blank canvas, you might experiment with the different pieces of the puzzle. And I always divide my bubble diagram into 4 different graphic symbols. There's the room. This is going to be a quiet little refuge, play area, dining, veggies to grow, spa off the master bedroom. I've got this squiggly line that implies screening. I don't know yet if I'm going to grow it or build it. There's these arrows that are the connections, how I get from one space to the other, and where needed, a focal point, some high point, exclamation mark or 2 in the garden that your eye goes to. And with these 4 pieces, I can experiment with different configurations. For example, in the next one, what if I put the spa in the middle of the area off the dining room, etc. So before you just lock in, and if the space allows some flexibility, then try different layouts and see how it works. It's the same thing an architect might do in laying out the spaces in a house. You know, you're not going to come through the front door right into the bathroom and then go through the pantry before you get into the house. So figure out the layout first. And that's done with bubble diagrams, and you can kind of rate them. What do you like about A? What don't you like about A? What do you like about B, not like about it? And sometimes you end up with a hybrid, the best of all. From that bubble diagram, you start doing, or I start doing what I call a brain dump. Now, this is a different site. Don't mean to cause any whiplash here, but this is just my first thoughts, and I run it past the client. I usually just take a phone photo of it because it's usually too big to put on a scanner at home. And I send it to them, and we get on the phone and we just go through it. So quickly, for example, there's a beautiful, massive coast live oak growing right here that dominates the whole front yard. So we're going to stay clean underneath it and do kind of a rock garden. They need parking. We're going to create a new gate. Right now, there's a semicircular driveway coming through here. So we're going to get rid of half of it and have a nice path that leads to a new front yard patio, a couple of arches. We're going to take an existing spillway and turn it into something that looks more like a dried creek. Anyway, this is the brain dump. You check in with the client, say, am I on track, etc. Saves an awful lot of time. I just do this freehand. Well, I do everything freehand. No offense, Land FX, but I never got into CAD. So I don't know where that puts me in the food chain here. But, you know, the plants in the landscape don't seem to know the difference in how I drew them. So the brain dump. Jumping quickly now, we'll get back into the process in a minute. Somewhere along the way here, early in the design process, we want to check in with the client, see if there's any particular styles. Sometimes they start off by sending me a bunch of pictures. Hopefully they don't contradict each other. Once in a while, you get somebody sending you a photo of the Sonoran Desert and the Black Forest in Bavaria. Good luck sorting that one out. So think about landscape styles. You don't have to be an exact garden or architectural historian to nail it right. We don't have to have purity, but it's something that leads you forward in terms of where you're going to go. So for example, this, I immediately think Mediterranean or Moorish. What makes me think that? Well, axial symmetry, a very conservative use of water because that's what North Africa and Southern Europe have to deal with. So water is used very carefully. Plants are used often as an architectural frame. We don't see flourishing flowery gardens. So maybe this is your bag and you want to understand. Did I say your bag? Just got in a time machine and went back a few decades. Anyway, so pick a style. It might be something like this. I just call this old world because it's kind of just European influenced, you might say. It's got a cohesive geometry. Again, the plants in this case are used in more of a formal sort of sense. Color scheme is simple. Or you may have more of an Asian bent. And one of the things that distinguishes, especially Japanese gardens, is it's kind of a representation of nature, but rescaled. This is something that came to me from my first experiences with bonsai and Japanese gardens. So you don't have to imitate a style, but sometimes it's nice to have that as part of your path forward. And hopefully the house dictates the style. If you have a house that looks like it belongs on the Normandy coast and you want to put your Sonoran cactus and succulent collection in front of it, you're welcome to, but it doesn't work for me. So try to suit the garden to everything that's around it. So we've got a bubble diagram. We sort of have some idea where to go. How do you give it form? Bubble diagram is just a bunch of blobs on the page, and there's any number of approaches. Again, a very simplistic, simple drawing here. If you imagine you're looking down at the house and here's the backyard, we've got a few of the basic uses. This is going to be where we, so this is an informal, as you can see, naturalistic style. The dining area, everything's kind of loose forms. The focal point is off center. We've got a little soaking tub, reading area, and it just feels more organic in terms of how you move through the space and how it's organized. But the same garden with the same rooms and functions can also be formalized. We've still got our patio, we've still got a soaking tub and a bench, but everything is some sort of axial symmetry. We've got a strong axis going down the center. We've got a cross axis going through here, focal point, dead center, symmetrical use of plants. Same garden. I try not to force this on people, but I have so much fun when I create a grid and then kick it a few degrees off. So again, I won't belabor all of it, but sometimes this is the best fit. And what I do like about using a diagonal is the diagonal line through any rectangular space is longer than if I just went from here to here or across the yard. I've got a longer axis this way. So in small gardens, it actually can make them feel a little bit bigger if you work on a skew geometry. Just touching on design principles. There's hundreds of books with hundreds of pages on visual design, but this often helps set the course for people who are a little less comfortable with it. So in dealing with outdoors, I think before you get into any of the stylistic stuff, you're just trying to figure out the spatial concept. Upper left, is it going to be more of just kind of an organic, natural form, or more like a formal, Moorish type garden on the right? Everything's geometric, mathematically based. The lower left is a house I visited in Washington one time. And although it looks somewhat organic, everything's laid out very intentionally. There's windows that let you see out the back toward a very long vista into an agricultural valley. So you can kind of have the best of both that way. And then there's just the whimsical stuff, laying out the space to create something artistic like on the lower right. But I think we need to get a handle on how the space is used, how much negative space, in other words, the open areas that we can see through, and how much mass or positive material is balanced in the garden. Sometimes it's a lot of stuff and a little bit of space, and you got to grab a machete to get through your garden. And sometimes it looks like a Zen monastery. And then there's all the in-between. Using materials to define the space. I love this garden in the upper left. It's the Bloedel Reserve on Brisbane Island off of Seattle. And it's a Japanese garden that's tight and formal, close to the tea house. And as you go out, it gradually sort of dissipates into this forest of nature. The stone goes from rectangular cut stones to natural stones to a gravel path. All of those things are devices we can use in terms of design. To the complete opposite on the lower right, if I recall correctly, it's Delaney Topher's garden at a wonderful place up in Sonoma, California called Cornerstone that has a bunch of exhibition gardens there. So figuring out the space, how you're using it, I think is paramount. Now, onto plants. I know this is a big leap. Pardon my adult language on the far left there, but it matters. No offense to a lot of my colleagues out there, but I'm finding a lot of landscape design projects done by people who really don't understand their plant material. Oh, I spelled attention wrong. Apologies. We'll get our spell check fixed here someday. Darwin has something to say about this. Every plant has its genetic destiny. What I mean by that is, in order to create a truly sustainable garden, I prefer to use plants that are comfortable growing to their mature size without any interference from me, unless it's going to be a formal garden and clipped hedges are okay. I want to leave enough room for plants to do their thing, let them look their natural way with little interference or coaxing from me. And it's also a lot less work and a lot less green waste. So I think it's a must to understand your plant material and know how big it's going to grow. It will keep you away from one of my favorite things. Quick backtrack. My book was based on hoping that I could take my Crimes Against Horticulture, When Bad Taste Meets Power Tools collection and turn it into a book. Well, we didn't quite get there, but there's a few pages at the end of the book. But this is what I'm talking about. It's the meatloaf approach, or hoping that the gardener is going to trim everything, read your mind, and know how plants are going to grow. It usually doesn't happen. So understanding your plants and creating landscape garden maintenance outline for someone to follow, I think makes a tremendous amount of sense. So how do we pick the best plants for the space? I have a 4-step process. This is going to sound like an infomercial. And if you call in now, operators are standing by. You'll get a free garlic press. The 4 steps in this order: we think about plant function. We think about its size or the category or the role of the plant. We assure that it wants to grow where we're putting it, not just grow, but thrive. And the last thing we think about is appearance. And again, most people start with, ooh, shiny, I like these flowers, and they start building their garden. It's the last thing we think about. So digging in a little deeper on this. So what do I mean by function? It's the idea that plants can do something in the garden, regardless of what they look like. So what do plants do? They'll screen a view, they'll create shade, they'll provide food for us, they can help with erosion control and act as a bioswale. One of their functions is just to be drop dead gorgeous. It's fine to have parts of the garden that are just there because they're nice to look at and experience. A floor for recreation. I'm not a fan of artificial turf, so we'll take that out of the mix. So step 1, what do I need the plants to do? I go back to my early design and I just start writing down on it. I need screening here, I need shade here, etc. We'll find plants to meet those roles when the time comes. So plant function. 2 is what size or category of plant. I start all my planting plans by just blocking out these zones where different types of plants are needed. So if I need shade, obviously I'm going to go to a tree. Definition of a tree is 1 or multiple trunks with all the action starting up on the top. High shrubs and vines are any plant that is above eye level and dense, so a vine trained. We might use those for screening or for a windscreen or that sort of thing. My medium plants are about eye level to knee high, and the ground plane, my low stuff, is anything below the knees. So it can be turf, it can be perennials, things like that. And I'll show you how this plugs in once I get through these 4 slides. So just imagine like a topo map of a garden that's either tree, high, medium, or low. Then the tough part comes, knowing your plant material, what's actually going to grow where I'm putting it. And back to the crimes against horticulture stuff, paramount is understanding how big a plant is going to be so that we get the right size plant that doesn't require a lifetime of pruning or breaking up fights between plants that are going to grow into each other and create not only maintenance hassles, but start looking pretty ugly pretty quickly. What else influences plant growth? I think everyone knows it's how much sun a plant needs, the aspect, meaning if it's on a slope, is it facing east, which is pretty benign, or north, or is it a south or west facing slope? Apologies to anyone in the Southern Hemisphere watching this seminar, just reverse that. Soil and water, plants need soil. Plants need water. There's almost nothing that takes no water after establishment. So we want to match that to our willingness to commit resources to it. And all the other growing conditions. Will it tolerate wind? Is it hardy to the cold temperatures we get? If I'm close to the coast, is it going to develop mildew because of a fog belt or that sort of thing? As I say, there's no way around it. You really need to know your plant material. Study the gardens around your site, see what's thriving, see what's struggling, and learn from other people's successes. And then the last thing is making it beautiful. So we have all of these characteristics that plants have that can help you create style. And some of those characteristics that we're going to exploit, the architecture of a plant, I'll explain that in a second. The density, can you see through it? Is it more open? Foliage color. Anytime I put 2 things next to each other, I've started designing and I'm making some decision, just like planning a meal, on this goes with this or this doesn't go with this. And it might be based on style or strictly subjective aesthetic judgments that you make. But all of these things, the seasonal changes, developing fruit, fall color, all of that are things that we can pay attention to and intentionally combine to create composition. So a little more on plant composition. What is it we're working with? One thing I mentioned the size of a plant as being so important. And this is just a for instance. First of all, I think a plant composition looks far better when it's in layers. So we're seeing a foreground, a background, and a midground. It's much nicer than having a very narrow bed pushed up against a fence and just stacking plants next to each other. The analogy there, it's like trying to have a meeting in a church pew as opposed to around a table where everything can interact. So this is not particularly generous, but I would picture my background tall shrubs needing at least 6 feet diameter to spread out without getting in each other's way. And that's going to vary with the exact species that you pick. It might be more, might be a little less. I'm going to need at least 4 feet for my midground stuff, whether it's the big grasses or shrubby plants. And I'd feel cheated with just a couple of feet in the foreground for the ground covers, the color pops, the annuals, perennials, etc. But even here, I've got a 12-foot deep bed from front to back. Where I'm working in Santa Barbara, fortunately, everybody's finally ripping out their lawns, which were maximized, tiny little beds around the edge. And they're hoping to create these beautiful Martha Stewart style gardens in 2 feet of space. It ain't going to happen. So we shrink the lawn or get rid of it completely. We open up the beds and we have a little bit of fun with plant varieties in here. I call it PMS. Hope that should have given you a trigger warning, but it stands for predictable mature size. And there's no exact number. It's not like you turn a plant on, it grows to precisely 8 feet tall, 6 feet wide, but it's a predictable mature size that you should use intelligently to know how much space to give a plant. Let's talk a little bit about aesthetics. Hang on one second. I'm seeing on my screen here that there's a couple of Q&As and just want to see if I need to pay attention to them right now.
So those are actually Jeff. He's agreeing with you about the plant material. And
Jeff, you are such a smart person.
So
and a third one just popped up. Oh, just cut in and let me know if I should respond to something on the fly. Okay,
I'll hit you.
I will ignore that. Okay, plant characteristics. I don't know if you know that, but there are dozens of different types of plants. This is joke. Cue the laugh track. And there's all these, I already mentioned, there's all these different characteristics that plants have, multiple characteristics. When I teach classes in the field, there's a fabulous nursery up my way if you happen to be in the Santa Barbara Ventura area. It's called Seaside Gardens. And aside from being just a kick-ass nursery, they've also got 11 different demonstration gardens in different styles. And one of the first things I challenge my students to do is to look at a plant and give me a half a dozen descriptors. And we'll get into those here. So you should be able to look at any plant and say, this is what it has to offer. How am I going to use this? So all the visual characteristics of plants, you can see them here. I don't need to describe them to you if you're looking at it, but I do want to draw your attention to the lower left. That's a plant called Echium. I'm blanking on the last name. It's called Crown of Jewels, or anyway, I'll look it up. Anyway, that's just a deep red Echium, and behind it are common zonal geraniums or pelargoniums in this slightly orangey color. But you can see how just the color aspect of those two play off each other. That's composition. On the lower right, I've got an agave in front of a plant called Senecio or chalk fingers. And I'm playing with the idea of contrast and harmony. They're harmonious because there's silvery grays in both, but there's a tremendous amount of contrast because of the form of the plants. So these are all things that we exploit in trying to create some sort of design statement. There's the architecture of a plant. What's its shape or form? Bamboo, obviously vertical. Ground covers like armeria in the background or erodium in the foreground, upper right. They're low mat forming plants, but even these two little plants are making a statement. I've got a grass-like texture with the little bubbles floating above, and I've got another completely different form. What's harmonious? The pink. What's contrasting? Everything else about the plants. On the left, New Zealand flax. These are accent plants. They're like little explosions that create interest. And this is not only an explosion, but it's highly variegated. The yellow inside the light green leaf creates a lot of activity, especially in a shaded garden. Where it illuminates things. We've got cloud-like shapes. So this is the architecture, the silhouette, the overall form of the plant. If you were to stand back and squint, what does it look like? We've got green and we've got green and we've got green. These are all shades of green. If you look closely at the upper left, going through that archway, there's these light yellow-green grasses along the base that illuminate it. And at the very back behind the sculpture is a dark green Italian cypress. So we've got this whole range of medium, light, and dark greens. Off to the right in the back, Dasylirion with a form of euphorbia in front of it. Ornamental grasses, and if you squint, what looks like a spruce forest going up a hillside is actually a little 3-inch high sedum succulent called blue spruce with a little carex sedge growing in front of it. So we've got all these ranges of greens to compose with. We've got quite the range of foliage, color. And one of my favorite places I've ever seen is at a park in downtown Santa Barbara called Alice Keck Park Memorial Garden. And on the upper right, we've got asparagus fern, Myers asparagus with acanthus behind it. Two green plants that couldn't be any more different from each other, from their architecture to their density, to their color. So these are all things that we exploit. My philosophy is design a garden as if it will never flower. I'll wait for you to catch your breath and get up off the floor. Because a garden needs to hold together 364 or 5 days out of the year. And if you're just relying on flower color, it ain't going to happen. So design a garden that looks great, whether it's flowering or not. When the flowers come in, icing on the cake. Examples of composition. This is a variegated basil in front of dark leaf form of sweet potato. This is at the Smithsonian Edible Garden in Washington. A garden I designed, probably still my pride and joy. This is a little 300 square foot space. In the far back right, you'll see giant timber bamboo. Everything is greens, but I'm playing with those light and dark and variegation. And a little side story. The garden was done with these plant elements. The owners were traveling in San Diego, stopped at an art/garden shop and found the bench there, which is not only the perfect green color for the garden, but if you look at the trim around it, it looks like bamboo. The hair stood up on my neck when I saw this. I've never been happier. A little quick lesson on color. I'm sure a lot of you watching this have a much more sophisticated explanation, but if you don't, go out to go to an art supply store, buy one of those color wheels like you do in a beginning painting class, and learn a whole bunch about color terminology. So in the center here, the triangle, we've got the 3 primary colors, yellow, red, and blue. You mix any of those two together, and we're talking about pigment here, not combining light, like stage lighting or whatever. So we've got our primaries. We mix 2 primaries together. Yellow and red give us orange, red and blue give us violet, etc. And then we break those down again. If we mix yellow with orange, we get a tertiary color, which is brilliantly called yellow-orange, I guess. These are the warm colors. We go from yellow-green, which is bright and reads from a distance, through our red. These are the cooler colors. They're the blues, the purplish colors, the dark sort of greens. When I take 2 or 3 colors that are adjacent to each other, that's an analogous color scheme, harmonious color scheme. When I take colors from polar opposites, that would be a contrasting color scheme. You have triadic color schemes, etc. Won't go into that, but just a basic understanding of warm and cool, contrast and analogous or harmonious is good as you're putting a planting design together. And these are just the pure hues, H-U-E. This is the pure hue. Then we can start playing with tints and shades, or tints and tones. There's the warm colors, there's the cool colors. Any book on color theory or artist book will give you a little more insight on this. But then we have all these variations. So if I add, if we were doing finger painting and I put some blue on your paper, and then I splotch some white next to it, we'd get the sky blue or powder blue on the left and navy blue on the right. Add white to red, you get pink, you know, kind of like Hello Kitty and Pepto-Bismol. You go to the right, you add black to it, you get the Merlot, the wine colors, the burgundies, etc. So I can create a monochromatic color scheme just based on blues and purples, but then exploit the shades and the tints and get an even more diverse color scheme. Or I can do the same thing with polar opposites, and then also bring in their tints and their shades to create more variety. So harmony and contrast, I think that's the key. If you were to break visual design down to one principle, it's what do these things have in common? Why am I combining them? If you think about cooking, you know, there's certain ingredients that complement each other, and there's things that may not, or we may intentionally in a meal create something that has some contrast to it in terms of the dishes we choose. I'm getting close to lunchtime here, which is why I'm devolving. So think about harmony and contrast and how you're going to create visual interest. And this applies to your construction materials, everything in the garden, but right now we're focused on planting. A beautiful little vignette I was able to create in front of somebody's beautiful home. We've got Alstroemeria, or Peruvian lily, in the foreground. I think this is called Inca ice. And in the background is Chinese fountain grass, Petacetum orientale. What do they have in common? You can answer that yourself. What do they have in contrast? I think you see that by now. But these little things, whether they're done on a micro scale like this or on a macro scale, can be very effective. What we're looking for here is the ability to complete a design and be able to look at it and say, yeah, I meant to do that, as opposed to, how did this happen? And that's how a lot of gardens evolve. So using some of the terminology we've touched on, this would be a warm color scheme because it's based in the sort of reds and copper colors that we get from orange. And we've got the shade of it. The upper left is a Gardenmeister fuchsia, and it's moving, kind of a darker shade of an orangey red. We've got the bronzy colors of orange that turn more like a brown sort of shade, with the New Zealand flax on the bottom right, coleus on the left. And then if you look more closely, there's a butylon, or what's it called, Japanese maple. And that's the more creamy sort of color, tangerine color. And then within all of that, if you look closely at the foliage, you'll notice that the fuchsia has more of an oblong shaped leaf coming to a point. And on the right, we've got more like a maple leaf. So there's a lot of contrast going on, but overall it holds together because all those different pigments that we're working with are close to each other on the color wheel. And then we go for full contrast. Everything about these three plants is different from the poker plant in the foreground. That's Kniphofia, although I've been told it should be pronounced Kniphofia, named after a man named Kniphoff. In the background, forest pansy redbud, Cercis canadensis forest pansy, and stuck there in the middle is a tall grass. So all of these different textures, colors contrasting each other. So this is high contrast form and color. So moving ahead, let's go back to that bubble diagram. And this is nuts and bolts how I put a planting design together. So I've come up with a bubble diagram. I know where the rooms are going to be. I leave the office. I come back the next morning. The drafting elves have come in and lo and behold, turn it into a hardscape plan using kind of a skewed layout for some of the hardscape and the rest of it being more organic. So here is our dining patio, a little play area, whatever. When I look out the master bedroom, I've got this open area that could double as an outdoor living space with a fountain there as my focal point. I'm protecting my slope now with a little retaining wall and some erosion control plantings, taking advantage of my good soil for my vegetable garden. I moved the shed. I've got a spa off the master bedroom. This is my hardscape. Now I need to think about plants. So here's my logic. I've got trees, narrow trees, so they don't become a problem for my neighbor, to help shade the view or block the view of the two-story windows here, give me more privacy at the spa. When I'm in the spa, this is at ground level. I've got some medium-sized plants that'll be above my eye level, so I feel a little bit of privacy here. I'm putting low plants, all of these L's, around the outside just to extend the feeling of openness. These will be perennials, grasses, etc. I've got my medium plants along here, partly so that when I'm sitting at my dining table, I'm not looking right into my vegetable garden. They're not always a thing of beauty. By the end of tomato season, it can look like a Tim Burton movie. I'm doing a little screening of the shed, and then I've got my high stuff along the edges to create some enclosure for my little resting area. And where it gets really narrow, I might end up putting a vine on the fence. Always ask my clients to check with the neighbor to see if they want to inherit the vine as well. So this is what I mean about 4 categories of plants. I got my tree, my high, my medium, and my low. Now stick with me because this is where we go. Absorb the knowledge. Thank you, Yoda. I call it the core of 4 because it's catchy and it'll work for an infomercial. But here's the basic idea. Imagine that even if your landscape's going to have 100 plants in it, you only get to start with 1 from each category. So even if you need five trees in the garden, they're all going to be the same one. All your tall plants are going to be the same one. The mediums, all the same. All the low ones, the same. It's pretty skimpy, but if you can put together a functional plant palette based on 4 plants that will look good together, do their job correctly, you are more than half of the way. Because now what we're going to do is we're going to find 1 companion for each plant. So when I'm done with this next step, I'm going to have 8 plants. I'm going to have 2 trees, 2 tall, 2 medium, 2 low, and it's going to be based on a rationale for why I think they fit together. So here's the theory. It's basically like a spreadsheet. I don't do this on paper. I just do it in my head. The idea is that if I can pick these 4 plants, my tree, my high, my medium, my low, and they work together visually and they're horticulturally compatible, and I've got a list of all these other plants that could fit in the garden. Now I'm going to pick 1 more tree, disregarding the other plants, and all I'm going to ask is, how do these 2 play together? If those work, it makes sense to me that they'll still fit with the other plants that I chose. So now I'm at 5. Same thing. I'm going to pick 1 tall shrub or vine. If it works with shrub number 1, it should work with all the others. You can see where this is going. If I can fill in 2 columns, I'm so far along the way that any other plant I consider, it's easier to say, no, that really doesn't go, or yes, this fits, this shakes things up. Now, I'll grant you that once I get out to column 236, the relationship between all these trees is going to break down. But even if you only get through about 8 plants, it makes all the rest of the plant selection so much easier. So this is what it looks like. Forgive me if you don't like these plants. It's just a graphic example here. So my starter tree is Cercis forest pansy. I'll describe it. It's dark I'm sorry, dark foliage. It's kind of a round, like a kid would draw a tree. It's got a certain form. It's pretty dense. It does lose its leaves in the winter, and it's got gorgeous little tiny pink flowers when it starts coming back in late winter and spring. My number one tall plant is Heteromeles. It's sort of like, if you don't know the plant, it's a Western native, but it's like holly. Gets red berries, white flowers. It's in the rose family, like apples and things like that. My medium plant, if you know Echium, you might be shocked that I'm calling it medium, but there's ways of keeping it small with the proper pruning. It's just for example. And my low plant is going to be a ground cover form of lantana, which in my climate can get about 18 inches tall and spread about 5 feet wide. So here's my palette. And if I absolutely had to, this sort of red, white, and blue and purple palette could be spread throughout the garden. It'd be kind of boring, but I think it works. Moving on. So what's going to go with the tree? What's going to go with the shrub, etc.? Here's where I go. My companion for the cercis is olive. Similar form, everything else is different. Small leaf, silvery, kind of gray green. So now I'm working with some variety, but also some harmony. My companion for Heteromeles is punica, or pomegranate. I've got my red berries in the winter from the Heteromeles. I've got red summer and fall fruit from my pomegranate. Everything else about them, very different, light yellow, green, small leaves, etc. on the punica. My companion for Echium, very popular plant out here, it's Salvia leucantha, or Mexican sage. Really, really similar form, smaller size, different scale. Very often it's nice to find two plants that have a lot of similarities. They're just like big brother and little brother. And for my ground cover, I've got a broadleaf perennial, or a broadleaf shrub for one. I'm going with something grassy. This is Carex tumulacola, or Berkeley sedge, and I think gives me a nice variety. Heading toward the finish line here. So here's my companions. And deep apologies for all of you who have great technology and graphics, but I'm working in PowerPoint here, and 100 years ago, I put this together. Fortunately, I can't hear you giggling or commenting, but this is sort of the wrap up for my adult ed classes and things. And it just shows how this Core 4 process, I think, will serve you really well getting from what am I going to plant here to your starter kit on how it all fits together. I'll save you having to look at this much longer. This is my last slide, and boy, I came in 2 minutes before the cutoff, and we can go a little bit extra. So big thanks to everybody at LandFX. If you're a regular user of theirs, I think you know the value of it. It's a world I will probably never explore. I encourage any of you lay people or pros to spend time in the garden. My old TV partner, Owen Dell, used to say that he probably still does, the most valuable design tool you have is a chair. Set it down on the site, move it around, sit in places you wouldn't normally sit, take in the whole garden, get some inspiration, figure out where you're gonna go. If you want to reach me, you can email me directly. Just put something in your subject line that says LandFX. My website, billygoodnick.com. It's all my residential work and a little bit of my philosophy. I'm in a niche where I don't do any projects that require design review or submitting permits or things. I give them the service of a landscape architect, but not all the detail. And that kind of wraps me up. So I don't know if Jake, you're going to come in and direct me to any of the Q&A or anything I need to do here.
Yeah,
but
so
that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
We loved it. We got a lot of good comments. Everybody
Wonderful.
really appreciated your workflows and the couple of the things. What was it? The Core of 4.
Yeah.
They really enjoyed that, saying stuff. We have one, Laura is also going to be stealing the word chilaxatorium from you.
Oh, yes.
So that's cool. She did have a question, what you use for plant references, books,
Oh,
databases.
I should tell you about that. Okay. And I don't know if you guys are integrating with it. Old friend of mine, Jerry Kiffe, Kiffe, has a plant database called Plant Master. It's got about 8,000 plants in it. That's completely searchable. It's a full photo collection of all of the different plants. It allows you to search by characteristics. It allows you to create plant palettes that you can use over and over again. So after I've finished a project that's in an oak understory, it's something I can use as a resource going back. So I rely very much, especially in terms of presentation, because what I do is I curate a list of 100 or more plants for a client. They go through them, they rank them, love it, like it, no thank you. I send them a little score sheet on an Excel spreadsheet. And we get to narrow down the plant palette that way, which really helps me. So now I've only got about 50 or 60 plants to choose from. So that's one of my databases. The other database is that I have been dealing with nursery related plant stuff since the 1970s. So there's a there's a data bank in my head. I just kind of know my stuff, but I'm always double checking. Used to be Sunset Western Garden Book, and graduated to Plant Master, but do look it over. I think you get a month free trial. Jerry is an absolute dream about getting on the phone with you, walking through it. They've got tutorials. It literally, this is not hyperbole, it changed my life as a designer. And I believe it's integrated with a lot of different CAD-based systems, but I can't tell you what those are because I've never explored it. It's not part of my work.
Well, I can tell you that we are working on integrating with them early
Oh,
next year.
wonderful.
So
yeah, it's great. You'll
be
learn 100 different ways of using it as your own tool. It's like a Swiss Army knife.
Yeah. So with that, Deborah is asking something similar here, just from a resource perspective, showing the different sizes of the same plant or same water needs or toxic plants and stuff like that. So I would definitely go poke around in those. I'm sure they've got
yes.
all of those resources there as well.
And there's nothing better than observing, gardens and seeing a plant that you think behaving differently, seeing a plant that you think would be fine in full sun and realizing that it's struggling there. I mean, some of it is just experiential learning and understanding what you're working with.
Yep. So we have a few more here we can try to tackle. Mason, new designer, he's wondering how you recommend walking the balance between meeting the wants of the client versus what we as the designer know is better. And the point, the case that he's talking about specifically is they want to install a cactus garden all the way around this corner lot, where he knows that from a walkability standpoint, trees would be a little bit more. So where would you say the balance?
I deal with this all the time, and it's a couple of things. If you've watched any crime TV shows, you know about the concept of Mirandizing, right? I'm going to inform you of your rights. You have the right to remain silent, etc. When I have a client asking for things against my better judgment, I Mirandize them. I say, here's what I think. And I say this, I don't even have to say it's based on my experience, because they can tell from my gray hair and my gray beard, I've been doing this a while, and they wouldn't have hired me unless they know something about me. So I give them my best advice, and one of two thoughts goes through my head. Either they'll take my advice, or I guess I'm not going to be photographing this for my portfolio.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one thing you deal with. And then it's whether it's so much out of your reality that you can walk away from the job. No offense, you do it professionally, and you can just explain in whatever terms It's against my better judgment. I can put you in touch with some other designers, etc. But these are the reasons I can't take on this job. And you just do it very politely. But that's it. If you're just starting out, you don't quite have that luxury. You want to keep all the potential clients you can, but if it crosses the line, be brave enough to politely walk away. Otherwise, do the best that you can along the way, and they might start seeing things your way. But I just do it on a logical, factual basis where I can.
Yep, I would agree with that.
That's helpful.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I would also put in there just educating the client to show them what their choice would be, what that outcome would be.
Well,
kind of a thing.
Another thing is that I'll start with a client who says, well, of course it's going to be all natives. And I ask them why. And they say, well, because they're low water using. And then I educate them. I say, well, unless you're like right at the wildland residential interface, and there's going to be wildlife benefits to it or habitat benefits to it. If you're in the middle of downtown and you plant one native plant, I guarantee you that the elk that feed off it aren't going to find your place. So what I'm getting at is somebody may just start with a preconceived idea. I want these plants, and sometimes just educating them and saying, well, I can use this in 20% of the areas and use it very effectively, but when we get around these areas, cactus aren't going to be happy or whatever, and we'll stay with that style. I understand what you're seeing, but what about mixing things up a little bit? So it's a compromise. You give them some of what they're looking for where it will do its absolute best. And then you find other ways of fitting around it.
Agreed. Okay, so we'll do two more questions. We got them all pouring in here. So remind you guys to reach out to Billy in that email on the screen.
And be patient. And be patient.
And be patient.
Yeah.
First and foremost, people are asking where they can actually find your book.
It's out of print. I bought the last carton of it, but they're still available. If you go to Amazon, I would always wish that you could order it from your local independent bookstore because they're fading fast and we need them. But they're still at Amazon. There's used copies, I think Powell. So shopping for them online could work. Your local library might have some on the shelf. It's an easy read. I like to tell people it's a book that's equally appropriate on the coffee table, the nightstand, or the porcelain tank.
Cool.
You're supposed to laugh there, Jake, because
you're
my only soundtrack here. Get it? Porcelain tank?
Yeah.
Okay.
A lot of people are reading in
there. Okay, they get it. I can hear them nodding. Anyway, it's out there. Yards, turn any outdoor space into the garden of your dreams. I'm very, very proud of it. I never thought I was going to write a book, but it is kind of the culmination of everything I've taught. And it's a lot more than what's here. Some real good conversations, and I had a great editor. So cool. It looks like I know what I'm doing.
That works. And then the last one, having limitations of fire, deer, 4 seasons, bringing in a plant palette, like the limited plant palette, bringing in that concept of contrast, the harmony, all that stuff. How do you design then bringing interest with a small number of plants?
Well, in most garden styles, I'm always an advocate for fewer varieties and more repetition. Okay. The example I use, well, I'm in California, so we talk about Caltrans, but if you were designing, a highway landscape, it would be a half acre of this next to an acre of that, etc. Even if you have a small plant palette, it doesn't stop you from being creative. Even if you have to repeat plants here and there or use less of the variety. There is no way I know exactly what deer are going to be eating on a particular date. But again, looking at observing surrounding landscapes and seeing, it's back to Darwin. Who are the survivors? Which are the ones that are going to take a licking, keep on kicking or whatever? And observing what works and what doesn't. It takes time, it takes experience, but I would always start with what's already in their garden that's surviving. can you create an analogy that if this is okay, then this other plant should be fine in terms of, water, sunlight, soil type, etc. Critters that eat things, I don't know. I don't have a wildlife degree, that sort of thing, so I can't give you too much advice other than use what works and observe what's thriving in a similar area.
Perfect. I think we end on that note. Again, thank you so much for your time. People loved it. Loved the resources, loved your attitude about it, your wittiness, and
can I add one other thing?
You sure can.
I host a TV show called Garden Wise. It's hosted by the county water agencies. It's mainly about sustainability and water use. The first 4 or 5 years, I did it with a guy named Owen Dell, and it's silly and kind of sitcom-y at the same time in a half-hour show. Then we switched to a news magazine format, and I've been hosting it for the past few years. If you send me an email, I will send you a link to the YouTube channel that has all of the shows. If you're curious about some of the topics I talk about, there's some pieces there. There's there's also a segment for the past few years where I interview my colleagues at their design sites, and you learn more about their process, how they run their business, etc. So please send me an email and I'll get you over to the TV show that I host. Some of it might be useful.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, and we will talk to you guys next time.
You are very welcome. Enjoy the holidays, everybody.
Have a great weekend.
All righty. Bye-bye.